Hello everyone and welcome to another News Coolum video and another plug side chat. In a recent CNN interview, GM announced that they would be partnering with, I believe I'm pronouncing this correct, Bechtel, a construction and contracting company, to build a nationwide charging network to support electric vehicle adoption. Now, this is huge and it's big for a number of reasons. But the main one that I want to call out is this will be the first time we've seen a nationwide public charging network started not based on some sort of civil action or judgment or some sort of a court order. So essentially, all of the national public charging networks that we've seen up to this point have been started based on funds due to some sort of illicit behavior, whether it was VW Group or NRG, right, that got fined and were told to make chargers essentially. You have ChargePoint, but they're not necessarily a cohesive nationwide network. They sell chargers to private businesses and they maintain a network the same as Greenlots, but it's not the same as a cohesive, structured public charging infrastructure. So this is a big deal, right? GM doing this. And it's the first time that we're actually seeing it. It's something similar to what's going on with like Ionity in Europe, where this is a essentially an automaker driving a public charging network. Now, Porsche and Rivian have both stated that they're going to be building chargers as well. And those chargers, the way they're describing them, seem more like convenience chargers for their owners and for points of interest. So it's not clear whether they intend it to be a standalone network or just to supplement the public charging infrastructure. What also isn't clear is whether Porsche and Rivian would allow non Porsche, non Rivian EV owners to use their network. So essentially, would they be making this another private network like the Tesla superchargers that are brand exclusive? GM has stated no, this is going to be a public charging network, and any vehicles using that standard will be able to charge on that network. I don't think it's likely that GM is going to install chargers with CHAdeMO hookups. That's an additional expense, something that they shouldn't really be required to foot. However, if Nissan wants to help fund the build out, I don't see why these dual standard chargers as they currently exist couldn't be installed. So there's absolutely no reason these chargers couldn't be installed as both CCS and CHAdeMO. But again, that would require some sort of contribution from Nissan, Mitsubishi to pay into this charging network essentially. But that's the other issue here too is GM isn't going to be funding this directly. It looks like they're setting up some sort of a private entity in coordination with Bechtel that will, manage and this build out using the data that GM has gathered from OnStar, from their various electric vehicle owners, data and feedback that they're getting that way. And, I'm fully in support of that sort of quantitative data that they have. They have, I'm sure, tons of data just from me alone. Even with the state of the public charging infrastructure when I got my Bolt EV 2.5 years ago, part of the reason I was able to jump into it and drive it as effectively as I was because of my experience driving the Volt prior to that. So while the Volt has a gasoline range extender, it was still providing me with a lot of information and data I needed in regards to my trip planning and what I needed to do. So that helped me transition into the Bolt EV a lot easier than I think had I just gone into a pure battery electric cold turkey without any knowledge of public charging networks or public charging solutions, essentially. So I think that data that GM has is very, very valuable. However, I would caution them against relying solely on that data. In fact, I would encourage them to look at what is omitted from that data. And what I'm referring to here is they're going to be gathering data from existing electric vehicle owners. Their stated goal is to push EV adoption. Well, if that's their goal, they need to look for the gaps in their data as well. And they really need to look at qualitative data in addition to that quantitative data. So don't just look at what these EV owners are doing with their cars. Reach out to them and ask them what they're doing, right? It's easy to look and say, oh, they charged here for 30 minutes or 45 minutes, but it's not as easy to figure out why, right? Or why they skipped certain chargers for other chargers, or why they made certain journeys instead of the journey that would have maybe more sense for them, right? What were the constraints and what weren't they able to do essentially? So these are all sort of points that I think GM needs to look at. One story I would reference is someone named Abraham Bald, a mathematician and statistician who during World War II was asked to analyze data about Allied bombers that were receiving heavy damage, and they wanted to armor up these planes in the places where they had received all of this damage from anti-aircraft guns. However, his response was, no, don't put armor where they're damaged. These planes returned. What we're worried about is the planes that didn't return. So if these planes returned with this damage, then that damage must not be critical. So essentially, put armor where these planes aren't damaged, because we can infer that those are the most critical spaces. Essentially, what I'm saying is I think GM needs to do a lot of analysis of the data that they have, do some sort of regression analysis. This is a type of analysis that astrophysicists use to and astronomers use to, guess where planetary bodies might be. They don't have any evidence to say they are there. They have this sort of ancillary data that indicates this is a good place to look. And a lot of times they're right on because of that regression analysis. They're able to identify locations where no data points would otherwise, indicate to them that there's something that needs to go there. So like I said, I would say be very, very thoughtful about this network. Do a lot of analysis, but don't just rely on the quantitative data. Also consider, like I said, the qualitative reports that you read from other EV owners. Reach out to EV owners and find out what they want. Don't just assume. But something else that they said though that I do think is spot on is this emphasis looking for places where people want to spend time, putting chargers that match the speed of that venue. Because, as an EV owner, you don't have to waste the time you're fueling like you do in a internal combustion engine vehicle where you have to compartmentalize your fuel. You're stuck there fueling your car, even though it's a short period of time. There's really no deviation from that. Whereas an EV owner, you can plug in, go do something, come back, and you have a full battery. So there is a very different mentality that goes into traveling with an electric vehicle. And I think GM is aware of that. The other thing I would say is they need to cull their data so that they're looking primarily at private owners. We kind of already have a lot of data on rideshare drivers, taxi drivers, and their use cases are very, very different. I got into a bit of an argument with a fellow member of a EV advocacy group that I'm part of because I don't know that city-based DC chargers actually do help EV adoption outside of the narrow population of taxi drivers and rideshare drivers. There's a reason I avoid charging in cities, and it's because of rideshare drivers. That heavily skews the data in an area where I don't think it's going to be helpful to the average electric vehicle owner or someone who's considering transitioning to electric vehicles. So in cities, I think the focus does need to be more on ensuring that local city governments, municipalities put pressure on multi-unit dwellings to make sure that off-street parking spaces are metered and have access to power hookups that can be used to install personal chargers for the people who those spots are designated for. Essentially, the 10 to 20 to maybe inside cities, 30% of the people who live in apartment buildings still have access to overnight charging. Also emphasize work charging. And those are the slow level 2 chargers. There's no need to do overkill in that regard. But the travel chargers are the other big Achilles heel And we're already seeing improvements with Electrify America, but having the addition of a network like GM's would be huge, right? I don't think anybody in Europe is complaining about having both Fastned and Ionity covering very similar corridors. And then, as always, I've made this a standing offer. If anybody from GM does want to reach out to me and ask for my feedback, I'm more than happy to give my, take or give my advice. Same goes for Rivian or Porsche, though I know nobody from there is ever going to ask me for my advice. So that's what my channel is for, essentially. I'd love to hear what you think. What do you think about this proposal from GM? What do you know about this Bechtel group? What do you think this network's going to look like? And who do you think is going to help fund it? What do you think the sites will be like? If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. It really does help out the channel. And thank you for watching.